Hi there. I'm going to talk about the case of Job Sikhala, the celebrated Zimbabwean politician who has been languishing in jail. Job Sikhala is vice chair of the main opposition party in Zimbabwe, the Citizens Coalition for Change. He was charged with inciting the public to commit acts of violence. He was subsequently arrested on the 21st of August 2020 for allegedly posting videos on social media inciting the public to revolt against the government of Emerson Mnangagwa. He was released on bail after 31 days in remand detention. Not taking that the chief enemy in the opposition was on bail. The government instructed the prosecution, and Sikhala was arrested again on the 9th of January 2021. This time charged with communicating what the government insisted were falsehoods for essentially sharing a video posted earlier on social media by the journalist Wiwa Chingono. Job Sikhala's case is not an isolated case and an instance of abuse of judicial process in terms of the law. Take, for instance, the case of Triple Sue spokesperson Fadzai Mahere, who was arrested on the 11th of January 2021 on charges relating to publishing or communicating false statements prejudicial to the state. The prosecution or the state alleged that was in contravention of Section 31 subsection A3 of the Criminal Law Code. She was released on bail on 18th of January after spending 72 days in remand. And yes, Fadzai Mahere's case is illustrative of, as well as that of Sikhala, is illustrative of a repressive government. And the case of Hopewell Chingono illustrates the same trend in the government. And in July 2020, Chingono was arrested on charges of incitement to participate in public violence, having allegedly contravened Section 187 subsection 1A, read with Section 37 subsection 1A1 of the Criminal Law Codification and Reform Act. He was accused for calling for the removal of a constitutionally elected government through an uprising. In fact, in June 2020, Chingono had exposed corruption in government, and he had exposed the corruptly awarded tender for COVID-19 drugs to Drugs International. The tender was awarded by the Ministry of Health and Child Welfare, and having been denied bail, Chingono spent 45 days in pre-trial detention, during which time he was held at Harare's notorious Chikurubi maximum security prison. And the cases I have illustrated above, or I have discussed above, illustrate the issue of the weaponization of the criminal law, and why is Sikhala's case and others I've discussed above so important to ordinary Zimbabweans. First and foremost, at the personal level, the unconstitutional abuse of the criminal law has a devastating impact on Sikhala's physical health, and people have actually up to social media to raise funds for Sikhala's treatment in prison. Sikhala is a breadwinner to his family, and his continued incarceration has tipped his wife and kids into untold hardships, both financial and material. And At the national level, this case demonstrates that the rights enumerated within the Constitution of Zimbabwe are now cosmetic. The government in power, the ZANU-PF ruling party, is weaponizing the criminal law to silence its critics, and this has a chilling effect on freedom of both freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. And it means that the ordinary man on the street cannot hold to account those in power. Now, the Consulate Generals would want you to believe otherwise, and they would want to persuade you that all is well, Zimbabwe is a democracy, there is a rule of law in Zimbabwe, but that's all BS, like they would say, in ordinary street language. And then an opposition that cannot present alternatives to the ruling party makes the idea of democracy itself a mirage, a mockery. Zimbabwe is already a militarized dictatorship, with the military generals of the Coast-like variety running the show, while civilian politicians are simply puppets in business suits. And why would the generals like this sort of arrangement? Simply because a pliant and tame opposition or critics that fear imprisonment and they actually dancing to the tune of those who are wielding real power behind the scenes, that is the generals. And it makes it more difficult to build a society where ordinary people's needs determine the policies the government is pursuing. The politicians, like we have seen on a daily basis in Zimbabwe, the politicians build mansions, they accumulate numbered accounts in places like the Cayman Islands or Switzerland, and they feast on caviar and champagne, and while the generality of the citizenry are starving. And the three cases I've discussed above, Job Sikhala, Hopewell Chingono, Fadzai Mahere, they are all illustrative of persecution by prosecution, regardless of whether the allegations are true. The process of prosecution itself is rigged, where the courts have been captured and the judges are in fear of upsetting their political masters. And as we have seen from the instances above, in Zimbabwe, persecution of critics of the government is now through prosecution with political convenience rather than facts on the ground used to determine the fate of the accused and the length of the prison sentences they are going to receive. Now, pre-trial release or bail is essential to the upholding of the principle of the presumption of innocence, a fundamental tenet of the rule of law. It is established in the Zimbabwean constitution and forms part of Zimbabwe's international legal obligations and African and global treaties. For instance, Section 51 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe prescribes that any person who is arrested must be released unconditionally or on reasonable conditions. Now, the three cases I have shown, critics of the government, the opposition politicians, they are not like even given a bail. They try to make it as difficult as possible for them to contest those conditions. And so there you are. And in addition to this misapplication of the law, there also appears to be a selective and inconsistent application of the law by the authorities. By comparison to the cases above, a few apparently politically favored persons have been treated preferentially. The case of Obadiah Moyo, the former Minister of Health, he was arrested on 19 June 2020, and he was arrested on corruption charges. The prosecution did not even oppose bail, and he was granted bail by the magistrate's court the following day on the 20th of June. And then you have another politician aligned to the ruling party, a former Minister of Labor and Social Welfare, Petronella Kagonye. She was arrested on allegations of corruption and was also granted bail just after 2 days in jail. And now what we have here is we have a country independent and sovereign, as the generals and the politicians who are in power, they would like to persuade us. And well, in an independent and sovereign country, political elites are at least to show some respect to their fellow citizens, and they do so. And they can do so, first and foremost, by honoring their fellow citizens' political rights and their civil liberties, which includes both freedoms of the press and of association. And mostly, they have to make it feasible that the critics of the government, as well as opposition politicians, the generality of the citizen, they have a right as well as the freedom to criticize the government, to essentially hold the government to account. Now, a government with no opposition and no critics, this threatens the very foundational order of the state. The rights enumerated within the constitution, they become cosmetic, and with the captured judiciary like we have in Zimbabwe, selectively applying the law, the country is reduced to little more than a Bantustan. Now, a Bantustan is not exactly like what we saw in South Africa. Bantustan simply means a country where civil and political rights are non-existent. Job Sikhala would not be languishing in jail if it were not for a judiciary that has been captured and passes judgments to please the Coast-like military junta and its civilian puppets in ZANU-PF. And the judiciary is captured, that's not something that can be contested. The governing party has been bribing the Chief Justice by extending his term past the constitutionally mandated retirement age of 70. And even as compromised as he is, Chief Justice Malawa acknowledges that judges are intimidated in the so-called political cases, especially those involving critics of the government and members of the opposition. And well, it's surprising that in line with Chief Justice Malawa's sympathies towards the ruling party, he has gone on to give instructions to his juniors that a directive essentially that judges should first seek approval of the adjustments by their superiors before being handed down. Now, weaponizing the law, persecution by prosecution, judicial capture, these are all features of a failed state. And this one is not actually mistaken if they are saying Zimbabwe is a failed state, because these are the hallmarks, these are the signals of a failed state. And in Africa and elsewhere, these failed states, the number of them are as long as your arm. This brings to mind the places like Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, just to name a few. But that's besides the point. You become independent as a state, and we can claim that Zimbabwe is independent. That's not disputed. But yet then, a sovereign country, you say the whole idea is so that you can determine your own collective futures and in the process improve the lives of your fellow citizens. A political elite that is just there for self-enrichment and primitive accumulation of wealth, all acquired through corruption and rotten rule, is nothing more than a force of occupation. Now, take for instance, like say the Rwandans, when they marched into Kinshasa in 1997, in the mid-90s, they had invaded the country, the DRC, in the mid-1990s, and they went on to loot money from the state bank in Kinshasa. They shipped material resources such as coffee, gold, timber, and coltan back to their countries. They could do so. They were an invading force. They were an army of occupation. Why, one would want to ask, why is the political elite in Zimbabwe behaving as if they are an invading force, a force of occupation? Yeah, well, there you are. That's my question. I hope you have enjoyed the issues covered in this recording. Please don't forget to give Afro Perspective some likes, and please subscribe so I can manage to produce more content of this type. Thank you. Bye.